What's going on, everybody, and welcome to the Other Side of the Firewall podcast, where we talk about the latest and greatest in cybersecurity news, as well as we highlight those movers and shakers and glass ceiling breakers, those people of color who've made it to the other side of the proverbial firewall. My name is Ryan Williams, and as always, I'm joined by Shannon Times.
What's up? What's up?
What's going on? And welcome to Wednesday's episode. So if you follow the program, so Monday and Tuesday are our topics, Wednesdays a discussion, and then Fridays we talk about everything else. So movies, books, games, all that non-cyber related stuff. Usually it's like 98% non-cyber, but definitely continue to tune in throughout the week. We definitely appreciate all those who already like, sharing, and subscribing, but I want to increase those numbers. So if you have not already, check out our YouTube channel so you can see our smiling faces, as well as leave us comments there, and you know, hit the like button and share and all that good stuff. And then continue to tune into our audio podcast as well on your platform of choice. But without further ado, I'll give it to Shannon.
All right, everybody. So this discussion this week, right? So it comes from Axios.com, written by Sam Sabin, and it's titled "The Cyber Workforce is Slowly but Surely Diversifying." Right, and that's what we're all about, right? We're all about diversifying the cybersecurity workforce. So they had a report that came out, right? So what it's saying is that the cybersecurity workforce is becoming less white, but there's still a ways to go to attract minority white workers to the field and keep them there, right? So it's been one of those things where it's been white males have historically dominated, right, when it comes to cybersecurity and the makeup of it, right? So they reference a report from 2021, I believe it was, so like 2 years ago, which is not that old, right? And they say that 4% of cybersecurity workers self-identify as Hispanic, 9% is Black, 24% is women, right? Because that's also diversity, right? When it comes to being in the field, they're clearly lacking when it comes to women as well, right? But what they talk about here is that it's actually going up now, right? So there is some positive things. So 66% of cyber professionals who joined the field in the last 12 months across Canada, the UK, the US, and Ireland aren't white, which I'm kind of surprised by the Ireland one, right? But I don't know, maybe that's maybe they have more people of color over there than I thought they did, right? But what they're talking about is getting more diversity, and they're actually, what they reference in this report is aiming for more diversity when they put the listings out there, right? So the job listings come out, and they actually list in the job listings what they're starting to do, which I thought would be a deterrent, but apparently it hasn't been, is the fact that they have DEI in their companies, right? And that's something that they're working towards. Because I was sure that would be one of the things where it would turn people off, right? So people would be like, I don't want to have to deal with that, you know, this, that, and the third, but it hasn't been. They're saying that the inclusion of that, when they've looked at postings that have that in there, it's more welcoming for people of color, right? Like people of color and women, right? So they're going down a good direction with this. And I think it's a good way to go about doing this, right? Like, I appreciate it. I like it, right? And again, that's what this podcast is about, right? Is highlighting these types of things that are out there, right? So they also reference in this article the demand has been growing for cybersecurity workers, right? And talk about how still woefully understaffed the field is, right? They talk about that as well, right? So, as we've talked about in the past as well, is burnout, right? So you got the cybersecurity workers, they got 61% of them in the study that said that they're burned out, right? Which they released in a report they did earlier this year in 2023. But seeing the uptick in minorities, right, whether they be Latino, Black, women as well, right, is a good thing to see here, right? And I like seeing it, and I like the fact that they're actually referencing, so you're not actually surprising people when they come into these positions as well, right? Like they're mentioning the DEI things that they work for in the country and the company, and people aren't getting in there, and then they're like, oh, I quit because of this, that, and the third, right? Because we see that out there, right? We see, you know, depending on what news you look at, right, how the DEI has become sort of a boogeyman out there for some people that are out there, right? So you don't want somebody to get hired on and be like, oh, I didn't know it was going to be like this. So people are going in with their eyes open, knowing, hey, you're going to have to deal with, you know, the diversity, right? The inclusion, like you're going to have to deal with all of that. And they're still signing on to these jobs. I like to see it, right? And I think it is something that honestly should be more across the board, right? So then you kind of, I don't want to say weed out the people that could be trouble, right? I'm not assuming anybody who doesn't want to deal with DEI is trouble, but anyone who doesn't want to deal with DEI is trouble. I'm saying it, you know what I mean? So, but it is what it is. But Ryan, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, please like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. No, this was a great article. So I had to. There were several different articles that popped up when I was looking for something to discuss when it came to DEI, or the sort. Because again, that's what the platform's for. But a lot of the news has been negative. Like we talked about it maybe a month ago, where it was a lot of those initiatives were last one in, first one out, right? So during the layoff craze or wave or whatever you want to call it, which is still happening, which is crazy to me, that some $1 trillion companies are still letting people go. Um, so hopefully that starts to settle by the end of the year. But to flip it back to being positive, it's good to see that even despite all that happening, that so many people of color and women are starting to join the force. And then when I talked to Daryl Brooks last Ask SSP, he's within the federal government space, so he sees it as a melting pot. So he's really surprised that there isn't a lot of diversity because he came out of college into the federal sector, right? And same thing with me, right? I went from uh, a year of college into the military. It was like, oh, it's a melting pot. Like, it's people all over the place. There wasn't a lot of women in IT or cyber, but there seemed to be a lot of diversity. But then when you get out to the quote unquote real world, that is not the case. Like this article says 69% all white male, right? But there's still millions of vacancies. So those vacancies can be filled by either more people who are currently in the field, or you can start to see diversity. You can start to see a growth, especially with women making up over half the population, right? So you mean to tell me that only 24% of cybersecurity is female, but it's over 4 billion women in the world, right? Like, and then I get it that you have to exclude people who are not in the proper age bracket, right? So let's say a quarter of 4 billion people are available to work in this field. It was like, oh, well, they don't have any interest in it. But that you mean to tell me that 1 billion women, out of them, only 24% want to be in cyber, right? It's because it has a stigma or a bad name, right? There's not a lot of women in it. So I don't see a lot of people who look like me. So I'm not going to necessarily go that field. Or I get in there and I get burnout. We talked about that, how there's a huge wave of women leaving cyber because of just being treated unfairly, not being paid the same as the male workers and things of that nature. So I say all that to say there's a lot of opportunity if the people who are currently in the field start to act right, and then continue to bring us people of color and women into the field, because it can only strengthen and make the career field better, because diversity of thought, diversity of culture, and all of the above just adds to the melting pot, and it gives you ideas you didn't necessarily have because you're used to talking to people and interacting with people who look like you and think like you. So I think it's all for the best, and I cannot wait for the private and public sector to look like the federal government right now, which is very diverse in comparison. And then the rising tide floats all ships, or whatever the saying is. I probably jacked it all up, but it should just continue to get better and better and better across all sectors once that happens, because you'll have access to communities you didn't have access to before, which will bring in that diversity of thought, and it should help your business, especially with all the growing initiatives, right? Like we have to combat the T1000s pretty soon as generative AI takes over. So we need people who can think that through to then help us in those situations to have better policies and programs and procedures, uh, techniques, tactics, procedures, all that good stuff, going into unknown landscape, because we have not fixed what's currently out there yet. Cybersecurity is lagging behind, so we need as many people as possible with as many good ideas as possible to not only catch up, but then to get ahead of whatever the future looks like. So I'm down for it.
For sure. And we've talked about it before on the show, right? Like, so it's not like when you start trying to get more inclusive when it comes to women and minorities, it's not like you're trying to take away from the pie, right? The pie is big enough, right? To where you can add more diversity into it,
Yeah.
and you won't have people that are losing out. Because I think that's the thought process with the people that are dominant, right? With the groups that are dominant in the field now, is they're just like, well, I don't want to lose what I have. You're not going to lose what you have. There is enough of the pie for everybody to eat. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And unless, so like the only thing I could think of that will ultimately tumble will be the overemployed. So we don't talk about that enough. We kind of shy away from it. There are people doing 2 or 3 different jobs um, because there's so much space and because they're already qualified to be in the field. And then there's not necessarily a restriction on you having double and triple dipping. Like I hear a lot of people getting fired because of it, right? Like they figure out like, hey, you work for the competitor. Like, so you have to go. But I think a lot of that will go. Like you see YouTube videos all the time. People are like, I make 320 million or $320,000 a year because I have 2 jobs in cybersecurity. Like that, come on, man.
And you know, it's crazy, right? So like I don't know if you saw this article where Google's pay was leaked recently. There was an Excel spreadsheet that got leaked that
Yeah,
showed Google employees were getting paid. So like you talking about you mentioned earlier about these $1 trillion companies having layoffs because like when you read the article, like some of these people are making up to $1 million in compensation a year. You know
yeah,
what I mean? Like I realize that's a drop in the bucket based on what the company is making, right? But like that's where they see the cut needing to be made, right? Like I don't have
right,
to give
right.
you $1 million in compensation when I can give somebody who's young and hungry. I can give them a quarter of that. I can give 250,000 and they're happy. You know what I mean? I think
Yeah,
that's kind
yeah.
of
So
what.
I do. Yeah, I agree. I think that what's crazy is because I'm not anti-capitalism at by any means, right? Like I'm all for it. I think what's happening is these companies who are making record profits are seeing that we can make even bigger record making profits, and then they're like, but to do that we have to reset these salaries, which I think I'm of 2 minds, right? Like if I was a person in a position where I was making that type of money, I too would not want to let any of it go. But in the grand scheme of things, they're going to make you like they're going to be like you have to be cut because we can hire 4 people for what we're paying you to do, not necessarily across the board, right? We're talking about those $1 trillion companies out there, not the mom and pops and things of that nature. um but I think the pendulum might swing a little too hard, and like they're like we saw like there's that one company that was just like, I'm gonna get rid of my whole cyber department. That's too much. You were cutting too deep in that regard. So I don't want to see anybody lose their job. But people who are fighting to not let more people in because they feel like their salary will be diluted. If you're making a reasonable salary, which or whatever that is, right, for the amount of work you're putting in, I can't determine what reasonable is to you. It's different to everybody else. I'm targeting people who are overemployed. Like I'm sorry, like if you are the person who's able to sneak in 2 jobs, they're going to figure you out because that can be freed up for somebody else to come in and potentially work for less, which I don't also want to see. But if it's unreasonable what you're being paid and you're getting paid that twice, they're coming for you, unfortunately. Or fortunately, I don't know. That's not me. So I don't have a dog in that fight.
Well, these $1 trillion companies are also beholden to stakeholders, right? Or to
Yeah,
stock, excuse me, not stakeholders, stockholders. So you don't get to be that valuable without being publicly traded, right? And like those stockholders want their dividends, right? That's what they want. They were like, hey,
yeah,
pay me some money based off what you guys are making, right? And in order to do that, if you want to keep paying them and you want them to keep buying your stock and your stock being considered more valuable, you got to pay out to them, right? And that's I think
right.
it's also
And I
something.
think there's a balance there. Like it's okay, you want to free up cap space, but don't do it at don't do it and dilute your ability to secure yourself, and don't do it to underpay people, right? Like there's a certain amount of compensation for somebody who's doing that type of work for you that they should continue to receive. Um, so don't price gouge it either, right? Like people like don't ask for, like you see it all the time. They're asking for a CISP, but they're only trying to pay you like not minimum wage, but you know what I mean? Like not a lot of money, but you want somebody with 5 years of experience to do this thing. So I'm not pushing for that either, for the price gouging and just trying to get people because they're down and out on their luck. Um, I think the market will regulate itself at some point, because at some point you'll be like, well, I'm not going to work for you for that, for pennies or what have you. But I don't know what that balance is. You know what I mean? Like, cause I'm new out here. Like I no longer have a pay grade. So I don't know what that looks like. But I'm just hoping that recruiters become more realistic with their expectations, what they're asking for, to give people more opportunity. Entry level job will actually be an entry level job, and that people are not gatekeeping because they're just trying to keep their pay as high as possible, um, but in an unrealistic fashion. Like, yeah, I want to keep my pay as high as possible as well, but I'm also not working for 2 or 3 different companies at the same time. So we'll see what the future holds. But definitely continue to like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Continue to tune in. Hopefully I didn't just lose a quarter of our subscribers because they're like, hey, I have 3 jobs. But I think more than likely it's people trying to break in and stuff like that are a lot of our listeners and audience. So they're like, yeah, make some space for me. So we'll see what the future holds. But definitely hit us up by all the websites that go by our name. Give me a person. I'm at RY Security Guy. That's RY Security Guy. Find me on LinkedIn, Clubhouse, Twitter, and Threads. Stay safe, stay secure.